Keth Station did not welcome anyone. It tolerated people the way an old coat tolerates a new stain, without comment, without adjustment, just absorbing them into its general griminess and carrying on. The lower market was the worst of it. Low ceilings, recycled air that tasted like burnt wiring and cheap fried protein, and the breath of too many species packed too close together for too long. Vendor stalls were jammed shoulder to shoulder, built from repurposed cargo panels and bad decisions, draped in blinking signage in 17 languages. The lights were the particular yellow-grey of old teeth. Everything was loud except the people who had been there long enough to stop hearing it. They moved through the noise like they moved through water, not fighting it, just existing inside it, faces aimed forward, eyes seeing just enough to avoid collision. Nobody looked too hard at anything in the lower market. That was the first rule of it. The second rule was that if you could not afford something, you stood far enough away from it that the vendor could pretend not to see you. The third rule nobody said out loud. It was the rule about who the first two rules applied to and who they didn't. Vreth had learned all three rules in about 40 minutes on her first day. She had been on Keth Station for 11 days. She was crouched against a load-bearing column near the east end of the market. Not sitting, crouching, the way her body defaulted to when it stopped being supervised. It was the posture of a species that had spent 100,000 years on cliff ledges and canyon walls, a posture her muscles knew even when her mind was too tired to override it. Her wings were folded hard against her back, pressed flat like she was trying to make them disappear. The fold was too tight. The kind of tight that looked deliberate. The kind that meant she had been doing it for a long time. Her scales had gone dull at the edges. Not dirty, dull. There was a difference that most of the people moving through the lower market would not have known and would not have cared to know. Dull meant the body had run through its reserves. Dull meant the biology had started quietly disassembling the less important things to keep the more important things going. Her kind went dull the way a fire went small before it went out, slowly, from the outside in, edges first. 6 meters away, a food vendor stall was doing strong business. She had been watching it for an hour. She had not moved toward it. The vendor was a broad Hikari male with 4 arms and the patient, deliberate indifference of someone who had spent years deciding who was worth acknowledging. He had glanced at Vreth twice. The first time, his eyes had moved away before they finished arriving. The second time, he had started rearranging items on his counter that did not need rearranging, and he had kept doing it until he was sure she understood. She understood. There was no sign, no policy, no rule she could name or argue against. It was just a texture, the texture of not being expected, spread thin over every surface and every face and every back that turned at just the right moment. She had spent 11 days reading it. It was not hard to read once you knew what you were looking for. The Vikari came around midday. 4 of them, moving through the market with the loose ease of people who had never once walked into a room wondering if they were allowed to be there. Trader class, from the look of their gear, soft-shell suits with the pale gold combined sigil on the breast, the kind that cost enough to be casual about. Wide, flat faces. Pale coloring. The particular expression of people who were already having a good day and were open to the idea of it getting better. One of them saw Vreth and said something to the others. They laughed and changed direction. The first one crouched in front of her, not with any kind of sincerity, in the loud, exaggerated way of someone performing concern for an audience, and held out a protein bar. His friends were already angling their personal recorders, getting the framing right. He wiggled the bar. His translation chip rendered what he said as, *, come on, little lizard. Aren't you hungry? *. His friends loved it. Vreth looked at the protein bar. She looked at his face. She did not look at the recorders. She had stopped looking at recorders because looking at them meant she knew she was being filmed, and knowing that meant she understood what she was to them in this moment, and understanding that made it very hard to keep her wings folded. She kept her wings folded. The Vikari pulled the bar back, extended it again, pulled it back. One of his friends was doubled over. Another was already replaying the clip and laughing at his own preview. The bar went out, came back, out, back. This was, apparently, the funniest thing that had happened on Keth Station in some time. It went on. Cole Danner came into the lower market from the north access corridor at the 4th hour of the station's artificial afternoon, moving with the specific, undecorated walk of a man who had somewhere to be and zero appetite for complications. He had a canvas satchel over one shoulder, loaded with ration packs, the dense ones, the ones with real calories rather than just the memory of them. His jacket collar was fraying. His hair was brown going grey. He had not shaved in 4 days and did not appear to be losing sleep over it. He was not a big man. He was a solid one. The kind of solid that does not come from effort but from years of small physical work done consistently, hauling, lifting, fitting himself into tight spaces aboard ships that were never designed with comfort as the priority. Nate Okafor was 2 steps behind him, which was usually where Nate was. Nate was 29, from Atlanta, and he had the habit, or maybe the gift, of seeing the whole room when most people were only seeing what was directly in front of them. He was seeing the whole room right now. The Vicari cluster near the east column. The recorders out and angled. The grayscale figure crouched at the base of the support beam with her wings pressed flat, and her eyes doing something careful and controlled that Nate did not have a name for yet. Nate said, "Cole." Not a question. A specific kind of sound that people make when they are hoping the other person will take 4 more seconds before doing anything. Cole had already stopped walking. He stood and looked. At the recorders. At the bar going out and coming back. At the dull edges of Vretha's scales. At the angle of her wings and the exact specific stillness of something that had been waiting a long time for something that was not coming. His jaw did something quiet. Not a clench. Smaller than that. The thing a face does when a decision gets made somewhere internal and does not bother announcing itself. He shifted the satchel strap. Nate said his name again. Same tone. A little more weight behind it. Cole was already not listening. He was already moving, not fast, not with the charged up energy of a man making a point, just moving forward through the market the way he moved through most things, with no particular drama and no apparent awareness that stopping was an option. The satchel was already open in his hand. The Vicari had not noticed him yet. They were still laughing. The recorder lights were still blinking. The protein bar was still going out and coming back. Cole walked through the edge of the cluster without looking at any of them, and they moved without knowing why, the way people move when something with sufficient direction passes close to them. He stopped in front of Vreth. He looked at her for 1 moment. Just one. Then he went down on 1 knee. The floor of the lower market was not clean. It had the particular quality of a surface that got mopped often enough to be technically sanitary and not often enough to ever look it. There was a grease stain to the left of the support column. A dark streak from something wheeled and heavy. The non-slip grip panels were worn smooth in the high traffic lanes, which defeated the purpose somewhat. Cole Danner put 1 knee on that floor without looking at it and without appearing to notice or care what was on it. He was at eye level with Vreth now. Her eyes were amber with vertical pupils, and up close they were doing something complicated, something that had layers to it, the way deep water has layers, the top surface moving one way and everything underneath moving somewhere else entirely. She did not flinch when he came down to her level. She went very still instead. The kind of still that is not calm. The kind that is a held breath dressed up as calm. Cole pulled a ration pack from the open satchel. The good kind, dense, high calorie. The protein and carb block that cargo crews lived on during long hauls. He cracked the seal on it. The smell of it went out into the air between them, warm and plain and real. He held it out. He said, in trade common that was rough around the edges and not particularly pretty but completely understandable, "Share a meal with me." 6 words.
No bow. No ceremony.
No performance of generosity. Just a man on 1 knee on a dirty floor with a ration pack in his hand and his eyes level with hers. The Vicari, who had gone briefly quiet when Cole pushed through them, recovered quickly. The one with the protein bar straightened up and said something to his friends. The recorders that had been aimed at Vreth swung to include Cole. Better content now. A hungry dragon and the human who sat down next to her. The mockery expanded to fit 2 subjects without any trouble at all. One of them said something in Vicari that the translation chips rendered as *, now there are 2 of them on the floor. *, this landed very well with the others. Cole did not look at them. He was looking at Vreth. Vreth had not moved. Her eyes had not left his face. She was reading him the way she had learned to read every interaction on Keth Station, carefully, searching for the seam, the place where the intention came apart and showed you what was underneath. She had gotten good at finding that seam. It was usually there quickly. She looked at his face for a long time. There was no seam. Not because he was performing sincerity. He was not performing anything. His face was just a face, a tired one, a little weathered, with no particular message on it. He had offered food. He was waiting to see what she did with that. That was the entirety of what was happening on his face. She reached out and took the ration pack. Her hands, four-fingered, scaled, with the slightly curved tips that were the remnant of climbing hooks from 300 generations back, closed around it with more care than the situation required. The way you handle something when you are afraid that paying too much attention to it will cause it to disappear. She ate. She did not eat fast. She ate the way someone eats when they have been skipping meals long enough that their body has started sending polite but urgent memos about it, steadily, without stopping, with a particular focus of a person for whom food right now was not a social experience but a biological one. Cole sat back on his heel and pulled out a second pack for himself and opened it and ate too. He did not watch her eat. He looked at the market instead, at the vendor stalls and the passing crowd and the general busy indifference of the place, as if sitting on the floor of the lower market in front of a Vicari audience was just where he happened to be right now, and he had no strong feelings about it either way. The Vicari were still recording. The crowd had thickened slightly at the edges. Not a real gathering, just the organic, slow-motion clustering that happens when something unusual sits still long enough for the people nearby to start noticing it. A few vendors had glanced over. A Pelari couple had stopped walking to look. A kid of some species Vreth did not recognize was staring from behind his parent's arm with the round, open expression of a young thing that had not yet learned to pretend it was not staring. Nate Okafor stood at the edge of all of it and watched. He watched Cole eating. He watched Vreth eating. He watched the Vicari with their recorders, still running their commentary, still finding it funny. He stood there for what felt like a full minute. He was doing a thing in his head that did not have a clean name. The math of a thing, the weight of it, what it cost to stay where he was versus what it cost to do what Cole had done. He had gotten very fast at that math over the years. He had always been a little too fast at it. He knew that about himself. He looked down at his own jacket pocket. The ration pack he had grabbed before leaving the ship was right there. Standard whole food. Not special. Just food. He pulled it out. He walked forward through the edge of the crowd. He found a space beside Cole, on the other side of Cole from Vreth, and he went down on one knee on the dirty floor and he opened the ration pack and he started eating. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. The gesture was the sentence. He ate and he looked at the middle distance and he did not look at the Vicari or the recorders or the people who had stopped to watch. The Vicari went a little quieter. Not silent. They recovered. They kept going. But the energy had changed shape. Two humans and a dragon girl on a dirty floor eating lunch was a different kind of funny from one. It had a different texture. It did not sit as easily. Lena Marsh had been at a vendor stall 15 feet away when Cole first pushed through the crowd. She was a xenosociologist, stationed on Keth on a long-term documentation posting, and she had seen a great many things in 3 years on the station. She had her personal recorder out, not because she had planned to record this. She had been recording the vendor interaction she had just finished and had not put it away yet. She turned it toward the column. She kept it running. She did not know exactly what she was recording. She knew the shape of a thing that mattered, the way you know a smell before you can name it. She stood very still and kept the frame steady and watched Cole and Nate eating on the floor beside the dragon girl with the dull-edged scales and the wings that were still folded and the hands that were still holding the ration pack with that specific too careful grip. She did not caption it yet. She did not know what to say. She would spend 3 days trying to figure out what to say. In the end, she would use almost nothing. The Vicari finished their recording eventually and moved on, still laughing, already planning what to do with the clip. The crowd unstuck itself and flowed back into motion. The vendor stall across from them went back to business. The market went on being the market, loud and close and indifferent and carrying on. Cole finished his ration pack and folded the wrapper neatly and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at Vreth. She was looking at him. He did not look away. Neither did she. "You have somewhere to be," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head once. Cole nodded, like that was useful information. Like it answered something. He looked around the lower market for a moment, at the bad lights and the pack stalls and the recycled air, and then he looked back at her. "Neither do we," he said. "For a while." He sat down properly on the floor, back against the column, and stretched his legs out, and that was that. They moved to a quieter corridor after the market, a service passage between cargo bays that had a bench bolted to one wall and a broken ventilation unit that made a low hum on a regular cycle, like something breathing wrong. The lights in here were white instead of yellow-grey, which was either better or worse depending on what you were carrying in your face at the time. Vreth sat on the bench. Cole sat on the other end of it. Nate leaned against the wall across from them with his arms folded, not in a closed-off way, just in the way of a person who was more comfortable standing. For a while nobody said anything. That was fine. Cole Danner had spent 10 years on long-haul routes, and he had made peace with silence a long time ago. Silence on a cargo run meant the ship was working. It was not a problem to solve. He applied the same logic here and simply let the corridor be quiet. Vreth sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the floor and did something internal that was not visible and not shared and took whatever time it took. Then she spoke. Her trade common was slow and deliberate, each word placed like someone picking a path across uneven ground. She had not spoken it in months. The words came out with a slight catch on the consonants, as if they needed a moment to remember how to sit in her mouth. She said there was something he needed to know about what he had done. Cole said okay. She said that for her people, sharing a meal was not a casual thing. It was not the way it was for most species, where eating together was just a comfortable way to spend time with someone. For the Drakri, her people, the clan species that had built the first deep-range star charts from memory and had negotiated treaties across 6 systems before most species were done arguing about weather, a shared meal was an oath. Old law. Unbreakable in Drakri terms, which meant a lot because Drakri did not use that word loosely. It meant, I see you. I name you kin. What I have is available to you and what you have is available to me, and I will not look away from that in front of others. She said this carefully, flatly, not with drama. Like someone reading the contents of a contract out loud because the other party had signed it without reading it. She said she understood that he did not know. She said humans did not know the custom, and she was not saying this to trap him in something. She was saying it because it was real, for her, and it seemed important that he know what it was real as, even if he decided it was not real for him. She said she did not expect anything from it. She said she understood that he was a stranger who had simply done something kind, and that was already more than. She stopped. Her jaw went tight. She looked at the floor again. She said she just wanted him to know what it was. Cole listened to all of this. He did not interrupt. He did not make the face that people sometimes make when someone from another species starts explaining something cultural, the polite but already leaving face. He just listened, the same way he had been sitting on the bench, with no strong opinion about whether this was taking too long. When she stopped, he was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone calculating. Just the quiet of someone who had heard something and was letting it settle before he said anything about it. Then he said, "Sounds about right to me." 4 words. He looked at her when he said it, and then he looked back at the corridor wall, and that was the entirety of his response. Nate uncrossed and recrossed his arms against the wall. He did not say anything. He looked at the broken ventilation unit and watched it hum. Vreth did not move for a moment. The thing that happened next was not a sound she chose. It was not something she had planned or prepared for. It came from somewhere in the chest, low, resonant, the kind of frequency that did not travel through air so much as through the surfaces things were sitting on. Nate felt it in the soles of his boots before he heard it with his ears. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. It was the most human and the least human sound he had ever heard in the same moment, the sound of something being handed back to a person who had stopped believing they would ever get it back, and the body not knowing whether to grieve the years it was gone or be glad it had returned, and making both sounds at once. Nate looked at the ceiling. Cole did not look away from the wall. The sound faded. The ventilation unit hummed its broken cycle. Vreth pressed the back of one scaled hand to her mouth for a moment. Then she put it back in her lap. She straightened up very carefully, the way a person straightens when they are reminding their body about dignity. Cole said, after a while, "What happened to your people?" It was a simple question. Not a careful one, not a politic one. He just asked it the way he asked things, straight and without decoration. Vreth was quiet for long enough that Nate thought she might not answer. Then she said, Kethra Vioen. Her home system. She said the name the way people say the names of things they have not said out loud in a long time, feeling the shape of it as it left her mouth, checking to see if it still held. She said it was not taken in war. She said there was no battle she could point to, no single moment where everything changed. She said it was done in a way that her people's honor code had made them unable to refuse once the first signature was placed. Contract by contract, treaty by treaty, each one reasonable in isolation, each one a little smaller than the last, until there was nothing left to sign away except the star itself. The Vicari Combine now ran an energy extraction node on the site of the Drakri home sun. There were 11,000 Drakri left. Scattered. scattered across stations and colony ships and service berths on vessels that had never been designed with them in mind. Once there had been 40 million. She said this without inflection, without asking for anything. It was not a complaint. It was just the shape of what had happened, laid flat so he could see it. Cole sat with it. He said nothing for a while. He did not say he was sorry, which was the thing most people said and which Vreth had learned to receive without expression because it cost them nothing to say and changed nothing for her. He did not say it was wrong or unfair or that something should be done. He did not perform any feeling about it at all. He said, "You got family on the colony ships." Vreth said she had a sister on a Drakari collective vessel called the HFY. 3 months' travel from here by civilian lane. Cole said, "You talked to her lately?" Vreth said, "No." Cole said, "You want to?" She looked at him. The amber eyes again, the vertical pupils, all those layers doing something complicated under the surface. "The comms on Keth Station are public access," Cole said. "I know which ones don't charge by the minute because I've had to use them. I can show you where they are if you want." It was such a small thing. So completely ordinary. The kind of thing a person does without thinking when they know where the good comms are and someone else needs to use one. Vreth looked at him for another moment. Then she said, "Yes." She said yes the way people say it when they have been saying no, or when no one has been asking them anything worth saying yes to for a long time. The ventilation unit hummed. Nate pushed off the wall and said he would go get them real drinks from the level 2 vending bay, not the level 3 ones because those were criminal, and he was going to take his time about it. He left the corridor. He walked very deliberately. He looked at the ceiling of the service passage as he went and did not let his face do the thing it wanted to do. He gave them a while. Lena Marsh posted the recording on the Humans and a Social Network 3 days after it was taken, which was how long it took her to decide what to say about it. In the end, she said almost nothing. She wrote the date. She wrote the location. She wrote, *Keth Station, Lower Market. Watch the copilot. And then she posted the clip, for minutes and 17 seconds of lower market footage, bad lighting, the sound of the market running underneath it all, and 2 humans on a dirty floor eating ration packs beside a grayscale dragon girl who ate with both hands wrapped around the pack like she was afraid it would leave. She did not write anything else. She decided the clip did not need a frame. She decided the frame she put on it would be the wrong size no matter what she chose. The clip did not spread fast. It was not that kind of thing. It did not spike or trend or hit any of the algorithmic triggers that made content run. It moved slowly instead, passed between people the way things get passed when they are heavy enough that you want to make sure someone else is holding them too. Someone sent it to a friend on a hauling crew in the Denver system. That person sent it to 3 others. A woman running a fuel depot on the outer Keth ring watched it twice and then sent it to her brother on a different station without saying anything except, *watch this one. *A pilot watched it in a bunk between shifts. A mechanic watched it on a lunch break. A pair of traders on a long-haul slow ship watched it together and then sat not talking for a while after. It moved through the human networks the way a smell moves through a building, without asking anyone's permission, not stopping at doors. By the end of the first month, it had been watched, forwarded, or quietly saved by enough people that it had become a thing in the human community the way some things become things. Not officially, not loudly, just *present. *known. Part of the shared texture of what was currently in circulation among people who talked to other people. Nobody organized anything. There was no meeting. No statement. No movement with a name or a flag or a set of demands issued to anyone. What happened instead was this. Humans got busy. Cargo contracts with Vicari-aligned stations were reviewed. A lot of them had flexibility built in, routes that could go one way or another, with no significant cost difference. Individually, humans started choosing the other way. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But enough, and consistently enough, that the Vicari Combine's logistics analysts started noticing a pattern in their routing data around the 6-week mark. Mechanics on shared stations, the kind of mechanics who kept ships running and knew every favor they were owed and owed nothing they hadn't already decided they were willing to give, found their schedules very full when Vicari vessels came in needing service work. Not refusing service. Never refusing. Just full. Come back next week. Maybe the week after. We'll see. Human-run jump relay stations, the waypoints that made long-distance Vicari commercial routes function the way they functioned, began experiencing what the technical logs classified as intermittent processing delays on Vicari routing requests. The delays were always brief, always within the acceptable variance range, always accompanied by thorough and extremely polite apologies about current system load. None of it was a violation of any treaty. None of it could be pointed at. None of it had a name or a coordinator or a document trail. It was just humans, individually, deciding how to spend their time and where to direct their scheduling attention and which of their various options to choose when all the options were technically available to them. Ambassador Duhal of the Vicari Combine noticed it at the 8-week mark. By the 10-week mark, he had a briefing on his desk that used the phrase *unexplained reduction in human commercial cooperation *7 times in 4 pages and offered no satisfying explanation for any of it. He sent formal inquiries to 3 human administrative officers. He received responses that were so polite they contained no actual information whatsoever. He escalated the inquiries. The responses became, impossibly, slightly more polite. He requested a bilateral meeting. The meeting was scheduled and then rescheduled twice due to what the human side described as internal coordination requirements, which was a phrase that meant nothing he could argue with. He was a very experienced diplomat. He had spent 30 years navigating the specific, technical maze of interspecies trade politics. He knew leverage. He knew precedent. He knew the exact language that forced the other side to either comply or create a violation of record. He had never once in 30 years encountered a situation where the other side was not doing anything. Not doing things was not a category his training had covered in any depth. He pulled the clip. He watched it. He watched it twice. He sat with it for a while, the way you sit with something you don't have the right tool for. Across the galaxy, in the signal space where 11,000 voices gathered when they gathered at all, something was happening that had not happened in 30 years. The Drakri diaspora was talking. Not in person. They were too scattered, too far, too spread thin across too many ships and stations and berths, but in signal. In the long-band communication channels that their clan network used for formal convening, the ones that required a quorum of elders to open and were never opened lightly. They had opened for the clip. 11,000 voices, on 11,000 different screens in 11,000 different places, watching a human cargo pilot put one knee on a dirty station floor and hold out a ration pack and say 6 words in rough trade common. The conversations that came out of that were long and varied and not for anyone outside the network. But one thing moved through it consistently, in the particular way that certain phrases move through Drakri conversation when they carry weight, passed carefully, said slowly, repeated by different voices until it had settled into the space where the clan kept the things it intended to remember. It was said first by an elder whose name translated roughly into trade common as Vessel of the Old Wind, which was a Drakri naming convention and not as dramatic as it sounded. She said it in Old Drakri, the formal register, the one that the younger diaspora-born members sometimes struggled with but always recognized as the register that meant *this matters and we are writing it down *. She said, the tree remembers the water that found it in the drought. Vreth heard it on the comms unit in Coal Ship, the *Ardent Cross * which smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee and had clearly been through several things its official log did not fully document. She was sitting in the navigator's seat, which she had been occupying on a provisional basis for 2 weeks while Cole and Nate ran a low-key supply route through the Keth Outer Ring. She had a clan channel connection running on the secondary screen, quiet, in the background. The way you run something you need to know is there even when you're not actively listening to it. She heard the elder's phrase. She sat with it for a moment. She pulled up Cole's frequency. He was in the cargo bay doing something that made irregular clanking sounds. She said, there is something one of our elders said. About you. About what you did. The clanking stopped. Cole said, yeah. She translated the phrase. She said it in trade common, slow, so he would get the sense of it. The tree remembers the water that found it in the drought. She heard him not saying anything for a moment on the other end. Then he said, that's a real nice thing to say. The clanking started again. Vreth turned back to the navigation screen. She sat there for a while, watching the route data run its quiet calculations across the display. Something in her chest had rearranged itself in the past 3 weeks. She did not have a name for the new arrangement. She was not sure yet if it had a name. It felt like a thing that was in the early stages of being a thing, not yet finished forming into whatever it was going to be. Outside the viewport, the stars were doing what stars did, holding still, burning, being very far away and very bright and completely indifferent to the small vessels moving through the dark between them. The *Ardent Cross * moved on. Somewhere behind it, on Keth Station, Lena Marsh was writing in her field journal. She was trying to describe what she had watched happen over the past 10 weeks, the slow, undirected, unorganized ripple that one clip from the lower market had sent out into the human network. She wrote several versions, deleted most of them, the ones that sounded like they were explaining too much, the ones that gave the humans too much credit for intention, the ones that gave them too little. She settled on one line. She looked at it for a while to make sure it was right. Then she saved it and closed the journal and went to bed. The ** Garden Cross * had a dent in the port cargo bay that Cole referred to as the incident in a tone that made it clear the topic was permanently closed. The ship itself was mid-class, about 14 years old by registration, with a crew cabin layout designed for 2 that had been loosely adapted for 3 over time through a series of small, creative spatial decisions that nobody had formally documented. The coffee maker ran a little hot. The secondary ventilation in the navigator's bay rattled when the ship moved through dense asteroid corridors, which Vreth found she did not mind because she had spent 11 days breathing recycled station air and even a rattling ventilation unit Beatketh station's lower market in every measurable way. She had been on the ship for 2 months when Cole put her name on the official crew manifest. Navigator and xenolinguistic consultant. He typed it himself, with 2 fingers, on the ship's registration terminal, and when she read the manifest update on her screen she looked at it for long enough that Nate, who was pretending to be very busy with a fuel consumption report at the next station, noticed. He said nothing about it. He went back to his report with a slightly different expression than he had before. Vreth was the first Drakri to hold a registered crew position on a human vessel. This was not announced. No one issued a statement about it. It was simply true, and it entered the record the way things entered records when nobody was making a point, quietly, as a fact, taking up its small specific amount of space in the Galactic Administrative Database and sitting there. Her navigation work was precise in the way that Drakri precision was always slightly unnerving to species who navigated by machine alone. She calculated route corrections in her head before the system finished running them and was usually right. She read Stellar drift by a method she had difficulty translating into Tradecommon because the foundational vocabulary for it did not exist in Tradecommon. It was a Drakri cognitive approach, something between intuition and mathematics that her people had been doing for so long it had become biology. Cole watched her do it once and said "ha" in the tone he used when something had impressed him, and he did not plan to elaborate on that. Nate had a list. He kept it on a personal data chip, not on any network system. 6 names on it, currently. Drakri refugees he had been quietly in contact with through the clan network channels that Vreth had opened up for him. People looking for placement on vessels, any vessels, people who had skills and no place to use them and no one currently asking. Mechanics. A cartographer. A former military pilot from the Drakri Defense Corps who had been running cargo for a non-Drakri freight company for 4 years and was very, very good at it. Nate made calls. He had the kind of network that built up naturally in people who paid attention for a long time in the right places, contacts on stations, acquaintances running small fleets, people who owed him minor favors and people he owed minor favors to, all of it informal, none of it organized, just the accumulated texture of 10 years of moving through the freight lanes being a person who noticed things and was reliably worth knowing. When Cole found out about the list, he looked at it for a while. The 6 names. The notes beside each one. The skill sets. The locations. He handed the chip back. He said, "You need a bigger spreadsheet." Nate said, "I know." That was the whole conversation. The formal inquiry was convened 4 months after the Keth Station incident, in the Galactic Commerce Council's secondary chamber on Veth Prime. The chamber was large and climate-controlled to a compromised temperature that satisfied none of the 17 species it regularly hosted and actively bothered 4 of them. The seating was arranged in a broad arc around a central floor space, tiered, each species delegation in their designated section, and the acoustics were engineered to carry whispers with the same clarity as announcements, which created an atmosphere in which it was very difficult to have a private reaction to anything. The inquiry was officially titled, *Review of Human Commercial Conduct Patterns, Post-Keth Incident. It had been pushed through the council calendar at Vakari Combine Initiative. Ambassador Durhal had prepared for it extensively. He had his 40 slides. He had precedent documentation going back 60 years. He had a team of 3 subordinates who had not slept properly in a week from preparation. Cole was there because Lena Marsh had spent 2 weeks arguing, through 3 layers of human administrative contact, that someone directly involved should be present, and because the human administrative contact had eventually agreed that this was probably a good idea, and because Cole had not been particularly consulted on this, he had been informed, while running a standard route, that he was expected on Veth Prime in 10 days, and he had said something under his breath and changed his route. He was wearing his cleanest jacket. There was a small grease stain on the left cuff that he had noticed on the shuttle from the landing bay and had decided was within acceptable parameters. Vreth stood at his left shoulder. Nate was in the gallery, in the section available to unlisted attendees. He had his arms folded and his expression arranged into the careful neutrality of someone who intended to watch everything and react to nothing in public. Lena sat in the documentation section with her recorder running and her field journal open on her knee. Duhal opened with procedural courtesy, which he was very good at, and moved into his presentation with the practiced ease of a man who had given versions of this presentation many times before in different rooms about different subjects. He presented the commercial data, the routing delays, the scheduling gaps, the 11% reduction in human-linked commerce across Vicari-aligned stations over the period in question. He presented it cleanly and without unnecessary language. He had clearly decided that the strongest version of his argument was the simplest one. Here are the numbers, here is the timeline, here is what we are asking. His central question, delivered at the end of it, with the full weight of 30 years of diplomatic precision behind it, was this: what did humanity hope to gain by this coordinated action? The chamber held the question for a moment. Cole looked at the floor, then at Duhal, then at his hands briefly. He was not a man who spoke in public. He was not a man who had prepared remarks. He had the look of someone who was searching for the simplest and most accurate version of a thing and was not going to speak until he found it. Vreth, at his shoulder, was very still. When he spoke, it was quietly enough that the chamber's acoustic system had to carry it, which it did, clearly and without distortion, out to every tiered seat in the arc. He said, "She was hungry. And you were laughing." He paused. Not for effect. Just because that was one thing and the next thing was its own thing. "We don't really have a policy position on that," he said. "We just don't want to be the people who kept walking." The chamber was quiet. Not the quiet of agreement or disagreement. The quiet of a room full of diplomats and administrators encountering a kind of answer that their frameworks were not built to process. Duhal's 40 slides were built for leverage, for counter-leverage, for the application of precedent and the citation of obligation. They were not built for a man in a jacket with a grease stain on the cuff saying *, "We just don't want to be the people who kept walking *, and apparently meaning it without any strategic structure behind it whatsoever. Duhal looked at Cole. Cole looked back with a steady, uncomplicated patience that Duhal was finding extremely difficult to negotiate with because there was nothing in it to push against. Vreth did not translate the silence that followed. She had translated everything else, Cole's words, into 4 languages in real time, her translation chips handling 2 of them and her own voice handling the formal Drakri register and the old Vicari trade dialect, but she let the silence sit in whatever language it arrived in and did not touch it. The inquiry concluded with a procedural recess. There were more sessions. There were committees. There were documents generated that nobody outside of 3 administrative officers would ever read. The Vicari combined did not get the formal censure declaration it had come to Veth Prime to build a case for, because the thing it was trying to censure was individual humans choosing how to spend their scheduling hours, which was not, technically, censorable. The 11% gap did not close quickly. It narrowed. Slowly. Over months. As things shifted, as people made different choices, as the weight of the moment began to distribute itself across time the way weight does. The list on Nate's data chip grew to 14 names. Then 21. A Drakri cartographer named Reth took a position on a human survey vessel out of the cult system and sent Nate a message that was 2 lines long and said, essentially, that she had not been called by her professional title in 4 years and that it had felt strange and correct to hear it again. Nate forwarded the message to Cole. Cole read it and nodded once and handed the pad back. Lena Marsh, in her quarters on Keth Station, opened her field journal to the entry she had saved 2 months ago. The one line she had written and looked at and decided was right. She read it again. She thought it was still right. She closed the journal. Shut the light. The station hummed around her, all its recycled air and bad lighting and crowd of species moving through each other's lives without particularly meaning to. What she had written was this: "They keep asking what humans wanted. I don't think they understand yet that some things humans do are not about wanting anything. Some things humans do are just about not being able to help it.